In this part of the program, we look at the Namibian economy, Africa and globalization, as well as Nigeria's Nollywood film industry. Following its latest MPC meeting, Namibia's central bank decided to keep its bank rate unchanged at 6%, saying its concerns over frail economic growth outweighed expectation that inflation will rise. Leonard Kamwe, economist at Artis Investment Management, reviewed the decision with us.
Perhaps more important to take into account for Namibia is the fact that monetary policy here takes the peg to the rand very seriously. So what the SAB does and the outlook for inflation in South Africa does matter. The equivalent question perhaps is, given South Africa didn't, or the SAB didn't move rates up, is it the right thing for Namibia to move rates up? With that, creating differences in interest rate could have some repercussions here and there.
Would you say, I mean, Leonard, are you saying that the next move coming through for Namibia would actually be to the upside, given the fact that we're also seeing this kind of rhetoric feeding through into South African investors' minds?
Exactly, Eleni. I think what is more important is perhaps what South Africa will do. That, by large, dictates what the Bank of Namibia decides.
Well, Leonard, given the fact that we have seen growth slowing quite significantly, and given the fact that it came through at 3.8% in 2011 from 6.6% in 2010, again, it brings up the question whether you actually look at the growth scenario versus the inflation scenario. We also know that Namibia is sitting at a far better position when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, sitting at an astonishing 27%. Relative to GDP. So it seems that the Namibian government has actually more room to move than what we see here in South Africa from a monetary policy perspective.
That's certainly true. However, I think the dilemma what we see the Bank of Namibia is whether they should target growth or inflation. They don't want to say any. Perhaps, in fact, to follow up on the first question. Does 6% or do they de facto follow the inflation band in South Africa? To some extent, they do. They seem to have some room. In fact, I would think the economy this year should perform a little bit better than it did last year. Should be a little of rebound from mining side, which was a drag in 2008. Yes, that was the case. So going forward, I think they might just be waiting on the move from the SAB. If they do move up, most likely will move up. But perhaps we'll tend to see that in the second half of this year.
Leonard, we also saw growth coming through in sectors that we don't actually see significant growth coming through in South Africa. Construction actually posted a growth number, wholesale and retail trade as well. Tourism, communications looking quite strong. And then what also is fascinating is that private sector credit extension is far higher in Namibia than what it is in South Africa, slowing to 9.8% from around 10.6% in the December month. Again, we're just looking at the health of the consumer there. Would you say that things in the economy are actually looking relatively robust at this point and are able to sustain the 6% interest rate environment? Cost of capital still not looking very expensive relative to historical levels.
That's perhaps the most important factor now. We haven't seen interest rates staying low as low as 6% in a very long time. But coming back to the state of the consumer, it's very difficult to say. But I mean, if you look, the debt to GDP ratios are not very small. But also, perhaps more important for Namibian numbers to look at the credit extension is one have to take into account that almost 2/3 of it goes into real estate. Property prices have been increasing quite significantly over the past few years, and the prices seem to be maintaining that upward trend. There are few people in Namibia who can borrow.
Ambassador Charles Stith, director at Boston University, also joined us to discuss Africa and globalization, opportunities and obstacles.
Let me start by saying that one of the things we punctuate in this year's report around the issue of governance is particularly noteworthy. 10 years ago, when we started issuing the report, there were 11 democratically retired African heads of state. Today, there are 33. which punctuates that despite what we hear about going on in Senegal with Wade manipulating the Constitution to get a third term, the debacle in the DRC, that democracy is firmly rooting on the continent. That's the good news on the governance side.
Sure.
On the economic side, there are such high points as South Africa's entrance into the BRIC Company of Nations, which is obviously going to be beneficial for South Africa, but it's going to be beneficial for the continent as well, because South Africa is a major source of foreign direct investment across the continent. In '94, South Africa contributed somewhere around 4 billion rand in economies across the continent.
Right.
Today, that's up to around 116 billion rand. So South Africa's entrance into the BRIC Company of Nations is going to be beneficial for the continent as a whole.
Right.
In Mauritius' report, for example, what Prime Minister Ramgoolam cites is that at independence, the per capita GDP was $260 US.
Right.
Today, it's $7,000, which suggests a substantial amount of growth. And you see similar sorts of trends across the continent. 10 years ago, Tanzania attracted 26 billion in foreign direct investment. Today, that's up to 127 billion. So the good news is that the continent is trending in the right direction.
Right. Let's perhaps give a little bit of context here. The people that you're citing that have written into the report, these are former presidents. Do you have any current presidents, sitting presidents who contribute to the report?
Now, the African Leaders State of Africa report reflects contributions of sitting presidents. For example, there's a submission by President Zuma. President Jakaya Kikwete from Tanzania. I just referenced Prime Minister Ramgoolam from Mauritius. So this is a vehicle that we've developed in order to provide current heads of state to present a picture to the world of what's going on in their country, how they see their country within the regions in which they exist, and within the global economy as a whole. And we thought this was important for several reasons.
Sure.
First of which is all too often the media, particularly in the West, covers the bad news about Africa. You know, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads.
I was hoping you would say excluding you.
Well, by inference, I did. That's why I said in the West. You do a very good job, Godfrey. But you understand what I'm saying.
I hear you.
And so we make an effort to disseminate this information to Western media outlets, to governments in the West, to major corporations that are doing business on the continent or ought to be thinking about doing business on the continent.
In less than 2 decades, Nollywood has become a phenomenon that has helped in shaping perceptions of Nigeria and the Nigerian society. All this has been achieved largely on the back of the resilient entrepreneurial spirit. In Lagos, Uche Okoronko reviewed the latest report on the Nigerian media and entertainment industries.
That is performing quite poorly as a result of 2 things. One, there's a contagion in the Nigerian markets right now. There's so many stocks trading at par value of 50 kobo, not just that. Then outside that, then that has got its own independent issues, corporate governance issues, disclosure level issues, and all that. So that's actually what's happening with that. But that doesn't really affect, you know, the whole money-making issue around the entertainment industry. You've got issues around quality, you've got issues around piracy, you've got issues around distributorship. Then very importantly, you've got issues around capital investments. The Nigerian entertainment industry has been doing so well, even without any form of venture capital contribution, even without any form of government income. So for all the problems, all the obstacles they've had to overcome, for all they've achieved despite these obstacles, then you can say they're actually doing fairly well economically.
Now, Godfrey did mention Nollywood, which is a huge moneymaker here in Nigeria. In fact, it's the country's biggest employer after agriculture. But the truth is, piracy and other issues are cutting we're not making as much money as we should be making. Can you give us reasons? What did you find in your report? Why isn't Nigeria? Why aren't we reaching that potential?
We aren't reaching the potential. Don't forget, when Nollywood started in the 90s, I mean, the report says Hubert Ogunde has always been there. We've had collaborations with Hollywood in the past. But Nollywood started as an accident of fate when we had living in bondage. So as at that time, all these structures weren't in place. We didn't have a proper distribution network. There weren't cinemas. So Nollywood actually started as an accident of fate. But having, started that way, we continued in the same pattern we started. The marketers who just bring in money, sponsor a movie, cost between $15,000 to $100,000, and they just want to. So we've continued with this model for too long. And now it's time to look at a new model. Jennifer has been in the cinemas now for over 5 months, and each show in the cinema has had a full hall. So now we're seeing that there's potential in quality. There's deeper potential in quality, not just for Nigeria, but across the continent and in the diaspora as well.
Now, like I said, piracy is a major issue. By the way, Jennifer is one of the most popular comedy movie series here in Nigeria. Piracy is a major issue. How much money do you think Nigeria loses to piracy alone?
It will be hard to place a figure on it because in the first place it's piracy, so it's an underground economy. So it's hard to place a figure on it. But you have a situation whereby someone just produces his movies, and before he releases it, it's already out with the pirates. So it just tells you that its loss ab initio. It's out there before he has even released his own work. So then you find out that some have already gone to the pirates and are now working with the pirates. It will be more than 3 billion if you have to come out a rough estimate, but I'm sure it will actually be much more because someone who produces a movie, for instance, he goes to the pirate and says, okay, look, this is my movie. Could you take it off me? And he probably collects, say, 10 million. If it's probably gone through the box office, you're probably making 100 million. So beyond the cost, you should also be looking at the opportunity cost. How much are we losing by actually working with the pirates or by actually allowing the pirates to control the distribution network?
Well, that's all for this edition of Africa This Week.